postmodern Neo Marxism. Um, uh, 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 okay, it's poor wording. I'm just gonna say it. It's not a great way to describe what we are talking about. And I'm not saying it's not accurate, but I don't think it's effective for people who criticize things like Marxism and communism and feminism and postmodernism, all of these intellectual dark web. I hate that term too. I don't like thinking of ideas that I generally share and often proliferate on my channel as some sort of illegal internet trafficking or something. No, don't call it that. That's bad. I don't know what the best way to describe it is. I don't know, just truth tellers, us. But regardless, when people who tell the truth and are interested in not playing into this lie that we live in a post-truth, post-fact society, when in actuality we can pull out our phones, which are essentially what would have been supercomputers 20 years ago. We can pull those out and access truths and facts anywhere, easily. It's more powerful than any library. So, I don't know. Libraries have computers, so maybe not exactly, but it's extraordinarily good to be able to access these facts. And when we talk about things, the biggest enemy of the truth and facts seems to be what some people describe as postmodern Neo Marxism. And I think that that's true. It's a problem, but it's not the best way to describe what it is. Postmodern Neo Marxism is sort of more of a description of where what we're dealing with now came from, where it evolved from, but it doesn't really label what it evolved into. And that is bad, because what that does is it allows for, complete sophists, like completely intellectually dishonest, horrible people like ContraPoints, who's, absolutely the worst person on this platform. And I don't know why more and more people aren't, ContraPoints is the new Anita Sarkeesian. It's Anita Sarkeesian 2.0. And but kind of even worse, to be perfectly honest. And ContraPoints can try to take apart the term postmodern neo-Marxism in the video about Jordan Peterson and say that the term itself is inherently contradictory. And of course, ContraPoints doesn't actually have a point, because the reason why people add the descriptor postmodern neo-Marxism is to say that this is definitely different than Marxism. This is a evolved, different, like postmodernism is a mechanism of basically saying that you no longer have to pay attention to facts anymore because reasons. And they applied that to Marxism so that they could kind of hold on to the dream of communism and collectivism, some sort of utopianist civilization that we know didn't work in the past, but some people want to believe that maybe it could exist in the future, and they just hate America so much that they are willing to try to smash capitalism to try it, and even if it doesn't work, they'll be happy just smashing America because they hate America because reasons. That's the mentality of those people. But they don't call themselves Marxists and postmodernists always. A lot of them will say that, Marxism failed, and they would say that they are not communists, but they would also say that real communism's never been tried yet. But I think that the best way to simply describe them is how they would probably describe themselves, which is intersectional feminists. And I know that I tend to be, pretty stuck on that definition. Like, I'm not going to decide that I should use some different term because it's more appropriate. No, people should really just think about the fact that postmodernism, postmodern Neo Marxism, blah, blah, like whatever, that's how they got to intersectional feminism. Intersectional feminism and, feminism in general is inherently the same type of collectivist, Marxist, communist dream. And, maybe hashtag not all feminists, because there is Camille Paglia and Christina Huff Summers who aren't like that, but they're basically like, well, what are they? Are they actually even feminists, or are they just weird feminist apologists that apologizing for the word and trash talking all the other feminists all the time for some reason? And so they basically don't really count. The intersectional feminism is essentially postmodern neo-Marxism. And I think it's better to describe that because that's what these people would call themselves. You are never going to meet a postmodern neo-Marxist that isn't an intersectional feminist. They will all say that they are. And that's sort of the diagnostic criteria for, if we can agree that that's the problem, and they will even call themselves intersectional feminists, then bam, let's call them that, because it is the problem. And intersectional feminism is inherently bad. I mean, let's just think, first of all, it's feminism. All feminism is bad. It always has been. It always will be. There's nothing redeeming about feminism because the foundational premise is just so wrong. It is the exact opposite of reality. The foundational premise of feminism is that despite what we all know, everybody knows what men actually do, which is do their best to do right by the women in their lives, by their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, and their lovers. They all want to do that. Men are willing to sacrifice their own lives fighting wars, saving women from natural disasters, all these things, and they always have been and always will be, and we've always known that about men. Feminists go on to say that actually men are just oppressing women, and it makes absolutely zero sense. Most of the feminist movement did come from not so much Marx, but the work of his friend, Frederick Engels, who was kind of a coattail writing person that Marx was financially dependent upon. And as soon as Marx died, Engels published a book about family life and saying that basically that men oppress women even more. And that's where a lot of, the feminist movement really came from, is rooted in this guy's book. Surprise, surprise. He didn't coin the term feminism. That was actually a French philosopher before Engels. But, so feminism is just inherently wrong. It can only live in the minds of people who are just pathologically disturbed and extremely bigoted against men. They just really, really hate men if they actually believe that men live to oppress them and not, serve them, essentially, because men mostly serve women. That's just the state of reality. Anybody who's been around anyone a lot can mostly tell you that. And yeah, there are guys who kind of, don't treat women well. I've certainly met a few in my life, but for the most part, they still would, if they had to choose between defending their wife and not defending their wife, they usually would. And so it's the same type of pathological sickness that inspires people to be okay with feminism, that would also inspire people to believe that we could live in some sort of a utopian civilization with heaven on earth. And the communist stuff and the feminist stuff is inherently intertwined. It always has been. That it has the same roots. And then intersectional feminism, let's just pause, full stop for a second. Let's just think about that word, intersectional. Really? Intersectional? We're talking about, feminism that has to do with the intersections? we all know what that means, but it's such an absurd word. So you combine intersectional with this concept of feminism, which was already completely absurd and outlandish, this concept that women are oppressed by men and not helped by men. And then you add that to this weird word that describes streets, and it's like trying to say that feminism is supposed to be for everybody because reasons, and we realize that this is definitely some sort of Marxist thing, but the important differentiation, and I think that the real reason that feminism lives on, I really like to say that intersectional feminism is communist particle board. And once the postmodernists decided to try to justify the communist movement and say that maybe it was sort of okay, even though they know it led to about 100 million deaths, they were able to just sort of decide, oh, well, nothing matters, the truth isn't real, and the true dream of those people was to come up with a rationalization about why real communism hasn't been tried with. And it really seems like they think that maybe the problem really was patriarchy, and that everything failed because men were in charge. And so this time they're going to put women in charge. And it's absurd. It's completely absurd, but that seems to be the pathological sickness that is motivating these people that are intersectional feminists and ultimately are postmodern Neo Marxists, but they don't even realize that. They don't realize the evolution of where their ideology came from, because they're not very smart. None of these people are smart, and if you sit around trying to actually read bell hooks, and only bell hooks, and the contemporaries of bell hooks. Bell hooks is a crazy person. Like, she is incomprehensibly bad. There's no great way of describing just how heinous bell hooks is until you actually sit down and read one of her books cover to cover. And it's this very convenient excuse that these people have. They get to say, how do you know anything about feminism? You've never read bell hooks. And they know that you haven't, and they know that you probably never will, because it's such a horrible, her books are just so terrible. And they get to have that gotcha moment because of the fact that it's like, this guy's, rational. He'll never read bell hooks. Well, I forced myself to do it. She's awful. God, is she awful. She is horrible. But if people were to just sit around reading her stuff, her writing has no basis in reality. She's just making stuff up as she goes along. She refers to studies that probably don't even exist, because she doesn't even cite what study she's talking about, who conducted it, what year it was in. She just casually mentions a study that supposedly exists, and people could sit around reading authors like bell hooks for a long time and never critically think about anything, and just become stupider. They could, because if for whatever reason they're told that bell hooks knows anything about anything and that she's not just a crazy person, bell hooks wrote a reasonable amount. They're not very long books, but I think that she wrote a decent amount of books. And these people could get dumber and dumber and dumber, and they would never know where it all came from and learn about other things in the world that matter, because ultimately the intersectional feminists think that, they literally do think that logic and reason are tools of the patriarchy. And yeah, but they don't know that all of that was only made possible, rooted in Marxism, which got distorted by postmodernism, and then they ended up with intersectional feminism. And so I just think that we should be calling it by what it currently is, and what they will call themselves, what they will admit to being, which is intersectional feminists. And I really stress the word feminist, because intersectionality, if it were to be used as a concept without feminism, it could make a little bit more sense. But the foundational premise is feminism, that, all oppressions are, or everybody's distinct group oppressions have to do with their own individual lived experiences, if they're at a certain intersection, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of a not a super useful concept, but it has some level of merit. But it absolutely has zero level of merit when you apply it to feminism, because that adds the implication that, you know, women always have it worse than men, which is the exact opposite of the truth in most arenas. And so they're never going to take the feminism part out of the intersectional part. Like, you don't get to be an intersectional without being a feminist. So you always need to add the caveat of feminism. So yeah, long story short, when you say postmodern Neo Marxism, it's clunky and it's not describing the here and now well enough. It's describing the evolution. Just use intersectional feminism instead, because that by itself is a completely ridiculous, ludicrous concept. And this idea that we have to like look at the intersections and that everything is connected, that only serves the purpose of trying to find and isolate a unified enemy. And so, and that is very, very Marxist, communist, you know, capitalism, evil, that's where all that stuff comes from. So yeah, just call it what it is. Intersectional feminism. Okay, bye.